I want to say hello to all the professionals of the dry prunes industry who usually attend this Congress. And this year, for the first time, I will have to do this presentation. So this is new for me. And, well, the topic of my presentation, as you can see on the slide, is the industry of the dry prunes and what cycle are we. We have a context for this. This context has to do with that we are having tendencies within a storm, and this is a literal storm. It has to do with what happened at the end of January with the big rains that made our scenario to change. The offer was changed, and also the amount of in the quality of the fruit. That makes us think how this is going to change the future, and if that compared with California and what all that is happening in the southern hemisphere, this is something that we have to think about, and that's the idea. This presentation makes an observation about 4 cycles. The modern area, is divided into 4 cycles, and the big question is if there is a 5th cycle. So the first cycle, this is the explosion of California, and this is up to 1930, and this starts in California in the coastal valleys, including there are many of them, but mostly we have in Sonoma, in Napa, Santa Cruz, and especially in Santa Clara. So the first settlers arrived into California. They wanted to find gold, but eventually they became farmers, and some of them started with the dry prunes production. And here we can see a chart on how within a short time we can see the amount of hectares growing in California from 1870, those are the first records, until 1930, where we have the peak of hectares in California. Out of this 202 that we had in 1870 up to about 70,500 in 1930. Certainly it's a record. It's like this rocket that we can see here in 6 decades. So with that level of production, with that level of with this motor of production, California, what they did is to start with an industry promoting the consumption of plums, not only for their markets but also for the exporting market. First they did, as California, was to replace imports of plums with their own production and then to export. And here we have an advertisement of talking about the good features for health and flavor. This is a good food with high content of iron and vitamins, and with a very good fruit. And all this is supported, according to the ad, with a survey done to 60,000 doctors supporting that plum is a very good food. And here we can see how the production started to grow in California from 1886 up to 1930, when we have this first period. And then we can see it was an explosion up to 250,000 metric tons. That was the history record. And you can see here how this was growing very much. And in red is 1918, because that year we had 3 weeks of constant rains, 2 weeks of rains after, and then 3 weeks of high humidity. And that year, the production in California was reduced to nearly a half. And that year incentivized the construction of drying kilns. And 2 years after, 20% of the plums in California was drying in kilns. So we can say in a certain way that the beginning of the drying kilns used for drying the plums was a reactive problem. And here we have the international market by 1930, and you can see here it was almost everything in the United States. We're talking about 250,000 tons, 30,000 in other areas of the United States, Washington and Oregon, and France, Romania. They were important, but not at the level of United States. Basically, the industry was California at that time. Now, what happened? Obviously, when in a country and an industry there is such growth as we had in California, the price obviously goes down, because it's impossible that consumption grows at that rate. So obviously we have an excess of offer that made the price to go down. So with these prices in this chart, we can see this is a reflection and corrected according to the inflation. So $338 is the value of today, the dollar of today. So this 338 as a peak went out to 120 in 1930. And this may take us to, from this final value, that we have a record of 250,000 tons with a very low value for that time of as a return to the producers. That take us to the second cycle in the history of prunes. So what happened in the coastal valleys? First, we had this phenomenon of the excess of offer, and then we have a second phenomenon, and that is the hectares that were planted in the central valleys had better yield than the coastal valleys. And this was informed, everyone knew about it, so there was a sort of transference from the coastal areas to the central valleys. But at the same time, the fact that the return went down to the producers in the coastal area made people to go away, and to, at the same time, in the same coastal valleys, the value of the price for housing was much higher. And then Santa Clara became Silicon Valley, so compete with those values was very difficult, and certainly that made people to move away from the plantation in the coastal area to the central valleys. So we can see here the surface at a global level, but basically in the coastal valleys. So here we have this column in blue. These are the other valleys, and the coastal valleys that are those in the green color. And you can see the green color goes down at half versus the other valleys that go down a little bit, but they remain steady. And what happened between 1930 and 60? That is the second cycle. The production, because of the reduction in the surface, the production goes down. That is about 49%, from 150,000 to 126,000 in 1960. Now, what the industry did, there was a reaction, and they started to work on three pillars. That is value, productivity, and promotion. Regarding value, they improved the product working on innovation, and at the beginning of the 30s, they launched the first dried prunes, tenderized dried prunes, and the juice of plums. This started at that time, and this, of course, made, it was a sort of relaunching of plums in the market, and it was promoted with a better consumption. Now, at the production level, that was another pillar. By the mid-50s, they launched all the mechanized harvesting with the shakers. And this basically in the Valley of Sacramento. This picture is from that Valley of Sacramento. So clearly with this, what they tried to do was to improve the return to the producer, even though the price was low. If the price was low, with this, obviously they improve the profitability of the product because they have better productivity in the field. And this, for instance, here we can see in this chart, causes and effect. We have this curve. Obviously, this has variations according to nature, but if you can see the average in terms of production in time, at the beginning of the 1930s, average productivity was about 2.5 tons per hectare, and by the end of at the end of the 50s, early 60s, we had 3.9 tons per hectare. And at a level of promotion, they kept working on the industry. In 1934, there was a discovery about this laxative agent, talking about the laxative properties of the plums, and this was a very good campaign that was launched in California. And of course, it was very successful to promote its consumption. And the Second World War, where there was a restriction for the use of the plum, internal consumption was promoted by linking the plums as a brand with personalities, with actresses such as Susan Hayward, and she was interviewed for a whole day, and obviously she was eating plums all day, and these ads were part of the promotion for the consumption of the plums. Something that is very common in case of the plums, it was to promote consumption through different recipes or how to use it. So here we can see promotions. This was very usual in nearly the whole last century. And here we can see as the amounts of hectares were reduced, the return to the producer started to improve between 1930 to 1960. There was a peak in the Second World War, basically because of the scarcity of the product and because there was a rationalization of the product and reaching at a level adjusted to according to the inflation that was about $377 by 1960. Now, if we can see the weight of the plum internationally, we can see that, of course, at a level of volume, a much lower volume, still California was the big leader in terms of production in the world. So at that time, we still cannot consider other countries in this industry. California is still the big reference at an international and industrial level, with 85% of production in the world. And that, of course, we can see that Argentina, Chile, and other countries that today are significant, they started to show. And then we start with the third cycle, that is from 1960 to 2001, and that was named the increase of Sacramento. And here, from 1960, and this is because of the coastal valleys were abandoned, total abandonment, to start using the central valleys where all the counties are located in the Sacramento Valley, that is Butte, Grand, Colusa, Sutter, Yuba, and Sacramento and Solano. And here we can see the evolution of each of these valleys. We can see how the Sacramento Valley started to increase. Here I included parts of the census in 1964, from 1,300 hectares to 2002, and we can see how the coastal valleys from 30,000 hectares and almost nothing in 2002, with no plantations in 2002, and other valleys that started to be relevant. The Valley of San Joaquin by 2002. But the Sacramento Valley was 80% of the hectares that were planted. And then we keep working on the same pillars than before: productivity, promotion, and here we can see how productivity continued increasing by 1960. We had nearly 3.9 going to 4.8 tons per hectare by end of the 90s and starting 2000. And here we can see as well how the average production in California between 1960 and 2000, it increased from 140 to 160,000 tons. So this is a higher scale, and obviously with these ups and downs in 1993, 98, but the new scale is increased 20,000 tons. The problem is that with this new scale, the inventories in California started to be increased, and there was a problem with this in terms of the return. So a big deal is that in 1965, talking about the promotion and innovation, we launched this dried prune. This is an ad in 1969. This was a milestone in the industry in California because clearly it was an incentive for consumption, and that caused, that at least allowed this increase in terms of production, because there was an increase of demand as well by the late part of this century. And this is what I said, these 20 additional thousand tons added by the end of the century had a repercussion on the price, the return to the producer. Once again, this is adjusted according to inflation. So $377 in 1960 went down, and it was $116 with a lot of inventory, residual inventory. And with these levels, the producers were concerned, and obviously this made the Ministry of Agriculture to intervene in the system. And that intervention was this: the tree removal. That was published in December 17th in 2001. I will read: the Department of Agriculture launched the elimination of plantations in order to get closer the to an equilibrium of the needs of the markets and to provide certain relief to the producers affected for the excess of offer and the low prices. So the producers are so damaged economically that the Ministry of Agriculture thought that they had to intervene in the offer, and there was an incentive to remove plantations in California. And finally, here we can see if this was the dawn of the bear, so the end of the Californian bear, if this implied to be the end of the leadership. And as a background, we have to say that at that time Chile was started to have an increase, a high increase. Well, we still can see that a small area compared with California, but this increase in terms of percentage was big. By mid-80s, early 90s, that increase was 20-30% per year, and Chile started to create this industry at that time. And Chile started going to markets where the United States was not as strong, markets, secondary markets for California, let us say Mexico, Brazil. And here we can see with this table, we can see the exports of Chile in 1990 to 2001. At the end of the third cycle, and we can see how Mexico and Brazil sum up about 54% of the exports. And we can see that by 2001, California has competition. They are facing their competition. Before they had 85%. Now they have 56% of the world production. United States to have competition. And here we can see the fourth cycle from 2001 to 2021, where we have a new leader, or it seems we have a new leader, and a puma, that animal is not by chance. And starting with the tree removal program in the United States, it happened that the United States started to remove trees, plum trees, and here we can see that every year they decrease their production hectares. And finally, you can see that by the last 5 years, we can see a certain level of stability, probably to provide supply to maybe 3 American companies, the big ones that need that amount of volume from California, and that is why we can see that level of stability in terms of plantation surfaces in California. And the production had a peak before the plantations were removed, and then we continue with the tendency going down. If we talk about a certain level of stability, we can see California was kind of stable around 80,000 tons because of these ups and downs that we have because of the nature, especially in 2020 when California had about 45,000 metric tons, but mostly California had 80,000 tons, and we could say that that's an equilibrium. We cannot say that is going to be in the long term, but that is about. We can say that the United States is about 80,000 tons, and that is a projection for the future. And what happened with Chile? With this new leader, Chile started to increase production, and after 2010, Chile was reaching production with California, and Chile and California were the leaders in terms of high production. Some years California, some other years in Chile. But at a level of the highest exporter, Chile became the biggest exporter in the world. And Chile started to be a new leader in this industry. And obviously Chile started with this, and they achieved this not with the same markets as we started in 1990, but new markets where United States and California was strong. These were the markets in Europe. We started in Germany, in the United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, Holland, and we took other markets. And even though the United States is not strong here, for instance, in Russia, in Poland, or at least legally they have to leave Poland, in Brazil, Mexico, and they made up a portfolio of markets. It's not exact, but similar to that of California. And what happened with the tree removal program? It had an effect that the USDA wanted. While that happened, while removing the trees, the price remained low. But once these hectares were reduced, the price, the return to the produced had a very big jump. That is clearly here you can see between 2003 and 4, and that price with certain ups and downs has remained up with $160, and from that time 17-18 years with very high returns for California. Once again, this is at a value, a current value with the dollar of today. So actually that had a good effect, and this comes also with improvements in the American product with a better size, and obviously with other effects. But you can see here that this caused an effect in terms of the reduction of the offer, and also what was left, it was a better offer. And once again, this is the question: are we facing a new cycle? And that is the question that we want to answer. There is a fifth cycle, or are we just living part of the fourth cycle, or the continuity? And I would say that this presentation will not answer that question, but we will provide some hints. First, here we have three factors to be analyzed: offer, demand, and also some pending tax of competitiveness that provides some hints about having a new cycle. So what are the factors of the offer that may define if we are in a new cycle? First, the world industry is living a big contraction, the biggest one from 2004. For the last 5 years, we can see the harvest in 2020 for both hemispheres. So here there is an overlapping. There was a reduction about 50,000 tons compared with 2019. That had a reduction of 30,000 compared with the previous year. So in 2020 we have 80,000 tons with less fruit than what we were used to have. So it's a contraction of the offer, and this is noticed because this big inventory that we had before have been decreasing. And these constructions of the offer are caused by different reasons. Contractions of offer in California, Chile, Argentina, Australia, South Africa. And this is affecting the offer, and this creates a scenario that it becomes an opportunity. And here we can see the inventories. They were growing strongly until 2018, and we said, wow, this inventory, it's going to be difficult that the prices have a recovery but from then on the inventories have been decreasing, and because of this weather phenomena, I would say, and also because of other effects that we are going to check later in this presentation. So we're going to analyze the phenomena. First, let's see the engine. This is the surface, and the offer may have some expectations to grow because of the surface, and it seems no, because if you can see, most countries are reducing the surface planted. We can see that in California, Chile, we are not increasing the amount of hectares being planted. So we would say it's difficult that the surface of plums is increased, and then because of that, the production increases in the world. So the engine of production is weaker than before, so it is difficult that the contraction of the offer will stop because of this phenomenon. In case of Chile, for instance, here we can see that the hectares have remained steady for the last 10 years in 13,500 hectares. And here we can see a comparison between what I think, my consultant think that should be the actual plantation, because ODEPA has a delay of 3 years per region, so we have this changes between 1 year and the other. So I understand that actually this purple color is kind of more accurate. And here in Chile we have another effect that we should take into account, and that is the birth or the increase, because for a long time Chile is exporting giant plums, and the uprising of the European plum, and this contracted the offer of plum for drying. And if you can see here, we have this for 3 years with exports of fresh fruit. That could be worse, so it could be bigger, it could be better. And this year it was very similar to the last year, but basically because we had these rains in January, otherwise we could have had 10,000 tons more for drying, more than what it was, more than 8,000 that we had in 2021. So this is a phenomenon that is being repeated. If it is, it's going to contract the offer available for dry plums. And if this is projected to the future, and this is the exercise that we have in this table, the conclusion is that about, with a surface that is not increasing, if we project according to the surface that we have today, we should not expect, if we don't have a contraction, if we don't have any other weather conditions that are not favorable or not favorable, we should not have production for dried plums not far from the 70,000 tons. That should be about the production, average production for the next years. 75,000 tons, that should be the target, average target. And this is a limit that we are imposing because we are putting most of our production in the fresh fruit because of this. Now, what happened in California, or what happened in California when we had this contraction in the offer? What happened is that there was a concentration in fewer operations at a higher scale. So here you can see a table with different sensors, and each of them had to do with the different cycles. And in the first census, we had 17,000 operations, then 6,000, then 1,100, and finally 600. So there was a decrease, significant decrease of the number of operations. And if we can see that, obviously, we can see the total hectares. There is a decrease of the hectares, but the size of each operation is increasing. So we had operations of 4.4 hectares to others of 34 hectares during the last cycles. And also the production of each operation was increased. If you can see on the penultimate, we started with 14 tons to 157 tons. So we started with a very isolated production in California, when California had a big surface amount of hectares planted, and now they had a lower level of atomization, big productions, and more effective production. We're talking about 5.1 tons per hectares, and that was the phenomenon that happened in the contraction of the offer. Now, if we look at Chile, with short history, we're talking about 40 years only, there is a similar phenomenon for the last few decades, because here in these last few decades, Chile started to have a certain level of stability, and the rest was only growth. During the last decade, I would say that Chile has a certain level of contraction or stability. But if we can see the other phenomena, where Chile started to increase the amount, the size of the operations, we started with 9 hectares to 22.6 hectares per operation at the same time. Operations, as you can see in the penultimate column, from 17 tons to 144 tons per operation. So you can see these are very similar figures to that of California, but very similar to California. Figures that we could say it's a benchmark, pretty similar. And if we put that into the agro industry, here we can see a little bit of distance. Here we have the biggest figures of Chile 2020 and California 2019. I wanted to compare years with a certain equilibrium, with no nature problems. Here we have in Chile 76,000 tons, processed tons, in California 2019 81,000 tons. We had 58 exporting companies and 23. So we have an average of 1,300 tons in Chile. And if we take the biggest exporters, the 3 biggest importers in California and Chile, we can see this difference of nearly 3 points. These 3 major exporters in Chile exported nearly 9,000 tons, and in United States 21,000. So there was a concentration. As we have a contraction of the offer, you can see that with these figures. And in terms of processing plants, we can see that there is in the United States is a smaller size, but if we can think about the 3 biggest processing companies, we can see the volumes up, because the 3 biggest exporters are also the biggest processing companies. So we can say at a level of 21,000 tons, the 3 biggest, and 9,000 for the 3 biggest processing companies in Chile. So what happens is that there is a high concentration when there is a contraction. So the big issue is that if this should increase before the contraction of the offer we are experiencing today. And the first conclusion is, living the phase of maturity and adaptation of the industry, the contraction of the offer is an opportunity for concentration and consolidation of the companies. So here, this is a question, but obviously it could be a conclusion. What pending debts for this new cycle? First, we have the return to the producer in California versus, and here we can see the curve of the size in California, and below the return as an average, as a nominal base. So what we did here, in the same curve of the size in California and the return at Chile for that size. So it's not the return of Chile for the size of Chile, but rather for the size of California. And if that is compared, I mean, both curves, you can see that from 2009 there is a difference. And that difference is a difference of added value by California. Something happened from 2009 where California created value above Chile. For the same size, California is having a better return than Chile. So this is something to be discussed. So as a conclusion, the phase of maturity and adaptation of an industry, the focus should be on adding value of the commercial and production chain through the value perceived by the consumer or the efficiency in the logistics. Now, what factors of demand we have? Let us see the main markets of destination during the last 10 years. Here we can see that it's Russia, China, Poland in the world. So if we look at the ones with the highest growth, here we can see China, Poland, and Mexico are within the biggest, and also those with the highest growth. In a certain way, Chile is within these markets, and probably the only where we should be is Japan. But here we have a task already made. And I will say that the dried prunes have a long way to go for the consumers. For years we have been talking about we have to consume because it is a laxative, good for health. We have provided recipes. It has vitamin A and B. It's good for energy. We have talked about Susan Hayward. This started from 1920, etc. And that way, today, we have to continue with the consumer, but this consumer talks about a new language. Now, they want food with good history, with companies having a good history. The consumer now wants to eat sustainably, food that are sustainable. The consumer wants green replacements of meat. The consumer wants to look good. So they are looking for the textures, different ones. They want to mix these textures, and they want to eat where, how, and when they feel okay, whatever they make them feel okay. They want to eat at the time, what they like, what they want, when they want it, and it has to. So we have to find a versatile product meeting all these requirements. So adding versatility to the already recognized functionality of the dried prunes, we will improve the attraction of our products. So living the phase of maturity and adaptation of an industry, we should increase the value perceived by the consumer regarding plums, adding versatility in order to adapt to what the consumer of today is looking for. I would say it's a new cycle for this industry. Thank you very much for listening to me.